Welcome to the Hot Rock Podcast. Steve Garland here. You know, if you are a fan of New Wave and you just wish you could have been there in the 80s to see the acts coming up, places like the Mabuhay in San Francisco, all the great club scenes, oh, you're in luck. Coming from San Francisco myself, back in the late 70s and 80s, I was on the radio and going to the clubs. And this is when New Wave was developing and then exploding worldwide. And in San Francisco, there was a band that was considered the hottest New Wave act called the Lloyds, who everybody thought was going to get signed by a label. The songs had great hooks, high energy, New Wave, and some power pop in there too, fronted by a very charismatic lead singer named Lulu and a tight band of musicians. And these guys sold out shows all over San Francisco, the Bay Area, Santa Cruz, and they also played with bands like Journey and the Ramones. Now, the Lloyds didn't secure a recording contract and eventually broke up, but they left one magnificent debut album to gather dust in studio storage room and back closets until now. Liberation Hall Records is reviving them. Punk New Wave fans, you will finally have a chance to get into the Lloyds with a newly released and remastered album called Attitude Check. And with me to talk about the 80s music scene in San Francisco and the story and music of the Lloyds are original Lloyds members, drummer Alan Thiele and guitarist David Martin. Hey guys, welcome to the show.
Hey there. I see.
Let's start with what's the backstory on how the Lloyds were formed, and give me a quick rundown of the band members.
It goes way back to being in a band in high school. There was a guy named Mark Rossbach who was managing our high school band, and he also managed a band called Shern. The two people that were in Shern were Lulu Lewis and her to-be future husband, Ronnie J. Mark really wanted those three people to work together. So he was the one that instigated us to start playing music and combine our, in italics, talents. And so we started working on development and working our originals. And then Mark brought in a guy named Mel Williams, who had done some work with Motown Records as a rep, and his wife, Lynn Williams, now Lynn Unrajak. And from there, we started putting the project together. There were a couple of people that were sort of in the original project, and when we started going much more progressive, much more artistic, more punk, more the scene in the late 70s, those two people didn't want to continue. And the first person I thought of to join with Lulu and Ronnie and myself was Alan, because he was just the best drummer I knew. He had the attitude, no pun intended, and I just really believed in him, and he was a great guy. Is that what you wanted me to say, Alan? Is that what you paid for? Okay, anyway.
It's almost, you almost read it perfectly, Dave. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. We were looking for a fifth person, and we literally found our bass player in an ad. We actually put an ad in the Berkeley Barb and found a guy named Pete Meter, who actually was Pete Heimlich. It turns out that Pete was a great songwriter. Ronnie was a fabulous songwriter. I was sort of the Harrison to their, if you will, to their Lennon and McCartney, because those guys just would crank out the tunes, and I was a little bit more light on that. And then it turned out that, you know, as a unit, we were able to arrange and create the songs. So once that lineup was set, we literally rehearsed for a year, and that was in 1978. We rehearsed for a year, probably 2, 3, even 4 times a week, and kept developing our songs, developing our style, had the guidance of our managers that would say that song rocks, that one does not. And from there, we did our first gig in the spring of 1979, and it just exploded.
Wow. Now, I'm going to play the first track from the album and introduce the audience to the sound of the Lloyds. This is from the Lloyds' newly released Attitude Check. I want to start with the song that got all the attention from record labels and a film company. Tell me about the song, and that's Why I Don't Like You.
It's a Pete Heimlich song, and he brought it to the band, and he had some ideas for wanting a really kind of a involving drum part that went out and got you. So we worked on that and came up with what we came up with. It really went over, and it was such a blast to play.
It definitely had the edge of punk, but it also had that power pop, you know, if you will, new wave tenacity, and then also a little bit of, like, you know, tongue firmly in cheek, got some humor in it, and a little bit of theatricals in there. And it just was a combination of really what the essence was of all of us.
Let's go, Lloyd!
1, 2! 1, 2! 1, 2, 3!
It's the Hot Rock Podcast. Steve Garland here with my guests from the Lloyds. We're talking to Alan Thiele and David Martin. Guys, tell me what it was like on stage, late 70s, early 80s, when you guys would hop on stage and play, and that's why.
Alan would start out with this amazing drum part that he came up with. It grabbed them. One thing that really happened pretty quick with our band is that Ronnie sort of described it once as being a big fish in a small pond. People gravitated to individuals. I mean, they knew every person in that band for who they were in addition to the music. And so the scenario that's involved in that song with Lulu and Ronnie doing this, little discussion in the middle of it and everything else, people got a kick out of it, and every night it was different because it was improv. The one thing that our management did also that was really, I think sort of brilliant from their point of view, because during the whole new wave and punk scene, I mean, everybody had their decorum and their way of, presenting themselves. And for some people, it was basically a T-shirt and a leather jacket, making their statement. Lynn, especially, had been a designer and was very artistic, and she gave us a direction for each person's look. And I think that, in addition to the parts we played, which were all very defined, probably added to people relating to the individuals on stage, as well as the music. We were very, very high energy, very physical on stage, too.
Well, that brings me, right before we play this, that brings me to the question of describing the sound of the Lloyds. You're the guys that put it together with the rest of the band. How would you describe the sound and the energy that you generated with the Lloyds?
We were all into power pop and popular music in general. And we did take some heat for that from the public. I mean, we were unabashedly wanting to have a hit and to work to get hit. But we also came by it honestly, because the music we listened to that we really loved was really largely pop music. I remember the Cars were kind of a big influence at first. We dug that record. But all the other stuff from the Beatles, Dave Clark 5, then there was a lot of harder edge stuff too, the Clash, everything like that. All those were influences.
I would have to say, maybe you can agree or disagree with this, Alan, that we were very song driven. That was really the first thing. And it was not necessarily, trying to get a hit. I think we got a little bit more into that rabbit hole at the very end, when we were sort of going, what's it going to take for this to happen, But initially, I think we were trying to make a difference, trying to do something cutting edge, have our own identity, have great songs, and we rehearsed our set, so they were tight. What we really were interested in doing is great songs that had impact and also had cutting edge. They were fresh. They were different. We were very conscious of not wanting to be anything that was rehashed. So consequently, it was very important for us not only to have great songs, but also to have high energy, in your face, shows. I know for a fact that when we would play at the Palms, I'd lose over 5 pounds a night just, doing the shows that we did.
Wow. Who wants to tell me about the track called Curiosity? Who did the songwriting and how did this song come about?
Dave, you better do this one.
Sure. I wrote the song, and I wrote a song that had different lyrics. And I wrote it initially on the piano and then transferred it to that, what becomes that sort of hook, plucky guitar part. And Pete Heimlich, he was not a fan of my lyrics on the song. So I said, I'm going to rewrite it. So he did. So we mashed it together. The band put it together. And we recorded it. It definitely was a song that the record companies were very interested in. And it starts with that really strong Alan Thiele backbeat and Pete Heimlich bass part.
Thanks, Dave.
I'm just doing what you told me to say.
Right.
Don't have to worry 'cause I know too much.
It's the Hot Rock Podcast. Steve Garland. We are with two members of the Lloyds, and we're talking about their lost 80s new wave album, Attitude Check, that's finally been remastered and released by Liberation Hall. By the way, it's available for download or on CD, wherever you get your music. Just type in the Lloyds with 2 L's and Attitude Check. Now, tell me how the band ended up in the movie Die Laughing on camera. Just go online and look up the movie Die Laughing. I don't recommend you watch it, but I do recommend you fast forward to where the Lloyds are performing. Who wants to share with me how the hell did that happen, guys?
Right around when we started playing in 79, probably already in 78, going into 79, Warner Brothers and a production team, Goober Peters. This was going to be a Robbie Benson-driven film. Robbie Benson, in about 78, 79, arguably was one of the biggest stars for young people in the world. And the film literally had Charles Durning, fabulous actor. It was Peter Coyote's first movie after ACT. Elsa Lancaster was in the film. Bud Cort from Harold and Maude.
Oh, God, yeah, Bud Cort.
And Robbie Benson wanted to not only do a new action, thriller, mystery, espionage, musical, comedy film, which you can tell already was going to be a tough thing to do. But he really wanted to feature his music in it, which he and his father had written. So part of the storyline was that he was in the middle of an espionage caper and also wanting to bring his band to audition for a music show, a talent show. They were looking all over the country, to my knowledge, because they had a band called Apollo that was going to be in the film, and that was Berry Gordy's son's band, and they were going to be one of the competing bands to Robbie Benson's band. And then they were looking for a punk new wave band or some band that had some edge and some visuals that could be the third band. Lo and behold, out of all the bands they could have picked, they found us in the clubs and offered us the deal.
And what was that experience like filming that?
Very exciting, really heady times. And then, of course, like you said, then we saw the movie.
There's some great sidebars as to what happened just before we were about to go on the Club Fugazi stage, where it was filmed for 2 weeks. And so while we were filming, we met not only the other actors, they would come and see us perform in the clubs. One of the highlights of my life was having lunch with Charles Durning and, have him at one of our shows. The thing also was that you had an entire large club. I don't know how many extras they had. You know that story, Steve.
Oh, yeah.
But I would say they maybe had at least 200 to 300 extras in the club, watching the filming, going nuts when we were playing, etc. And then a good portion of those people were waiting outside of the club after we'd film and thought we were the biggest stars in the world. So it was very, very, as Alan said, very exciting and wacky, to be out there. And we had barely even started, and these people just were going nuts for the music that they were hearing and liked what they saw on stage. And Alan actually talked to Barbra Streisand, who was at one of the shoots.
Actually, that's kind of a funny story in itself. I was waiting to use a payphone, and so was she. And it was very nice. I tried not to be a starstruck fanboy. I did invite her to the show that night, which we were playing. One of the nights we were taping, filming. She was very cool. She said she wasn't going to be able to make it, but a lot of the other, Bud Cort made it, Charles Durning made it. That was pretty cool to remember back to those times.
We were getting offers from some labels right out of the bat, along with this offer for this movie, and we went, man, if this breaks with Warner Brothers, then we'll be able to sort of write our ticket as to the company that we might want to work with. We really believed in this movie and the star power of it, and we believed that Warner Brothers was behind us, and we thought some really good things were coming from it.
And when the movie came out, what was everyone's reaction?
Should I take this one? And
take it, Alan.
All right. Well, I just remember sitting in the theater with all of my fellow band members. We were so excited. It was really cool. But I just remember when the lights went up, Ronnie goes, "I watching." Which is so Ronnie.
We just slowly melted into our chairs going, oh gosh, this sucks.
I want to play the track called Boys. Now, this track was recorded live?
There's two versions. There's one, I believe, from the Old Waldorf and one from the Catalyst.
The Catalyst track, that one is amazing because we'd been looking for a great version of the song. We didn't have one when we started, when we were offered this opportunity to put out the music. In a box in the storage facility, there was an 8-track tape that we didn't even know existed. And it was recorded at the Catalyst in Santa Cruz, a club that still exists to this day. It must have been a situation where somebody went, hey, we got a machine in the back. Give us $20 and we'll record your show. So we didn't know it existed. And then it ended up being a great performance. And again, the aforementioned Mick Conley was able to bring the best out of those tracks.
Well, the original recording was basically a board tape, and there were no close mics on the drums, and there was essentially a lot of room, which is a very massive room, a lot of room and very little, direct field type of sound. And what Mick did was just astonishing, really, with those tracks.
Daddy says that you're too young. Mama says it too. I say take love when it comes, and that's what you can do. They think they've given you all that you need, but if they only knew what you get from me. More than a child, you drive me wild. Young boys like you. More than a child, you drive me wild. Young boys just do Mama thinks you'll disobey. Daddy knows you will. You say that you want to stay, and I feel a thrill. I look into your eyes and see them gleaming. From me you'll get no lies. You send me screaming. More than a child, you drive me wild. Young boys like you. More than a child, you drive me wild. Young boys just do People say that I'm not well, that I'm too old for teens, but I just can't help myself. I see them in tight jeans, and if they want to play, I am not able to look the other way. I'd rather cradle. More than a child, you drive me wild. Young boys like you. More than a child, you drive me wild. Young boys just do. More than a child, you drive me wild. Young boys just do. More than a child, you drive me wild. Young boys like you.
It's the Hot Rock Podcast with the Lloyds. And if you say, who are the Lloyds? It's okay. Stick around because you're going to find out if you love new wave, power pop, and a little bit of punk. This is the band that should have been as big as Blondie. They're from San Francisco, so I know about them, and now you do too, thanks to the new release of their album, Attitude Check, with some extra live tracks, of which you just heard the song Boys, recorded at the Catalyst in Santa Cruz. And my guests on the show are original members of the band, drummer Alan Thiele and guitarist David Martin. Full disclosure, I've been friends with for the last, 300 years?
Give or take.
Give or take. Being in radio in San Francisco, David and I crossed paths in many different ways, and has continued to play with his band David Martin's House Party to this day. You can see him perform not only around the Bay Area, but wherever smart booking agents will pay the price.
Now I have to pay somebody else.
Exactly. Guys, what was the music scene like at the time for people who weren't there? We're talking from 78 through 84, 85. You were playing the clubs in San Francisco, mostly in the Bay Area, Santa Cruz. What was that like, and what do you remember most from your personal experience on stage playing clubs like the Mabuhay?
I'll just volunteer that it was really wonderful, and there was so much going on. It seemed like every telephone pole in the city was, had posters 5 or 6 deep, and the clubs were full all the time, and there were so many great bands and so much excitement about what was going on. And it was just, there was just a lot of fun. It seemed like kind of a joyous time in a way, although I realized, in retrospect, stuff can seem happier than it was. There was, I'm sure, a lot of heaviness going on societally, but as far as San Francisco music scene, it was great.
In San Francisco, in that 77, 78, 79, especially time, it was like the mods and the beats in England. You had the people that were a little bit more, quote unquote, new wave, and you had the people that considered themselves really edgy punk. So literally there was like a double scene. Like the Mabuhay was definitely the center of Punkland. And you could say that the Palms on Polk Street was a little bit more where the new wave and the poppier bands played. Some people crossed that line, and otherwise, there was a lot of competition. In this era, in San Francisco, there were dozens of clubs that were packed 7 nights a week. And every night you could go out, which I did, and you could hear incredible music. I always had the theory that it didn't make a difference what the garage band was or what the band was that were playing on a Tuesday night that never got to play on a Saturday night, and the bands that emerged and became really strong draws. I really felt that at least there was one great song with every one of those bands. And of course, this would be going easily till 2 a.m, and then it would be like, okay, whose house are we going to now? Whose apartment are we going to then? Because we're all really young, and it was party time, and you'd still, if you had a day job, you'd party and get up in the morning and do that. But there were a lot of musicians that created really bonding relationships that stayed together to this day. And it was wonderful, but it was, there was a lot of collateral damage, or a lot of drugs, a lot of things going on, major heroin, cocaine, you can go down the list. But that was all a part of the scene too.
Yeah. In full disclosure, what was the drug scene with your band? Was it into drugs, not so much, casual, too much?
I'd say it was not too much. We never, I think, had any issue where we had to have any kind of intervention or anything like that. And I don't think our performances were ever affected negatively by too much of anything, although there certainly was use of alcohol. There was the use of cocaine, especially later, and especially since some of the people surrounding the band were pretty involved in drugs. I remember one trip down to San Luis Obispo or Paso Robles, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I remember getting there and feeling like, it's going to be interesting trying to play, because there was a little bit of use in the car on the way down. But, so be it. We did not, I don't think we didn't really have a real problem. And we're all still around. We're all still around. That's also a blessing.
It would be very difficult to produce the kind of high energy performance that the Lloyds did on stage, and the precision being too high.
I would agree 100%. Dave talked about the weight loss. It would be great. We could have had a weight loss tape or something, because I think Jane Fonda was just starting out about that time. But we could have done the Lloyds workout tape, because we were all losing. It had a very positive effect in a way, because I had to start getting more physically fit, and I got into cycling, and which I continue to this day. So the Lloyds really kind of forced me to realize, well, this isn't like drumming that I've done before. This is flat out running a marathon.
The one thing I will say is that we were really, really, did I say really, really dedicated to the music. We were really dedicated to our ensemble and our team. We were surrounded everywhere by everything from hardcore heroin use, people that really, at that time, people didn't know how addictive cocaine was. Quaaludes were big. I mean, you can go down the list. And of course, alcohol is a major drug. But we were really committed to the music. And like I said, that we could not have done what we did and the type of shows we did, let alone the schedule we had. We made a commitment to ourselves and to each other that we would never put pressure on the band to make money, even though we were selling out shows all over the Bay Area, and we would play on a regular basis down in LA. We made a pact that we would not take shows because we needed the money. So consequently, all of us had other things we were doing to survive. In addition to the band, whether you were a waiter, whether you You can just go down the list, doing odd jobs, whatever it took to be able to keep the band fresh and to not get overplayed in our market.
Chills. Don't need a doctor, don't want the pills. I need a lover to give me thrills. One thing's always hanging on my mind. I'm lovesick all the time. Baby, I get lovesick all the time. I'm lovesick all the time. Baby, I get lovesick all the time. I'm lovesick all the time. Baby, I get lovesick all the time. When you discover you're all alone, you want a lover to call your own. I'll be your lover and take you home. And you love me till I'm going off my mind. I'm lovesick all the time. Baby, I get lovesick all the time. I'm lovesick all the time. Baby, I get lovesick all the time. I'm lovesick all the time. Baby, I get lovesick all the time. You always used to be a sad girl. They always said I was a bad girl. But now I realize, as I look into your eyes, that we've got better things to do, and I can see you lovesick too. Baby, I get lovesick all the time. I'm lovesick all the time. Baby, I get lovesick all the time. I'm lovesick all the time. Baby, I get lovesick all the time. Baby, I get lovesick all the time. I get lovesick all the time. Baby, I get lovesick all the time. Lovesick all the time. Baby, I get lovesick all the time. I'm lovesick all the time.
The Hot Rock Podcast with the Lloyds from their album that has been rescued from the 80s. One of the best new wave bands you have not heard before, but you can if you go online and you get their newly restored album. It's called Attitude Check, the Lloyds with 2 L's. My guests are David Martin, guitarist for the band, and drummer Alan Thiele. I think it's time to talk about your lead singer and front person, Lulu. She had a voice one Billboard critic said could stand up in a hurricane. Tell me about Lulu.
She was very dedicated to the music, and when you listen to her, the way the songs evolved, her phrasing, the way she approached her performance of them, and her consistency was really remarkable. And the tracks still sound fresh. Lulu was a really great combination of smart and tough, but also really sweet, a little vulnerable, and connected with people and connected with the audience just naturally. She didn't have to really work hard at it. She just did.
And a lot of people found her really sexy. That wasn't our job to to participate in, but she was. A lot of people said that she had a Judy Garland sort of charisma, if you will. And recently, a good friend of mine, a guy named Mike Waterman, who's a program director up in Santa Rosa, he got this record. And one thing he mentioned, if you listen to those performances on Attitude Check, the Lloyds, her performances are exciting. It's not easy for a lot of performers to get that type of energy and power and punch in the studio if they were performing in front of 2,000 people maybe, but to bring it out of yourself and make it happen. I mean, listen to the original Peter Frampton records, and then Frampton Comes Alive. You'll hear a perfect example of how an artist, sorry, Peter, had a whole different personality in front of an audience. And what's cool about the live cuts that are at the end as bonus tracks on Attitude Check is that it's not that much different from the studio energy. And I think that's something that can really be said about Louis, that he was a pro, as he knew how to dig deep, as he knew how to take direction, as he also knew how to source it out. And he really was very, 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 and is very, very special.
Another track on this album that the audiences went crazy for live ends up being one of the few songs the Lloyds didn't write. It's a Burt Burns song that was a hit in the 60s from the Exciters called Tell 'Em. So how did you guys land on that song?
I can't remember who chose it, but I know Pete was sort of an archivist, really into a lot of the music from the 50s and 60s.
It's actually the only song we did that wasn't, one that we wrote. And then we, of course, Lloydianed it up. It's very different from the original.
Yeah, it's definitely faster.
That was up to you.
It's really a cool song. It's a part of our early history. Man, it's a great song.
Can you tell me how the arrangement came about?
In the living room of our rehearsal studio at Sakamoto Hill, which was basically a suburban house where I lived at the time.
Band house.
It was a band house. Like in the movie Spinal Tap, there's a song called Hellhole, and it was sort of like that. Actually, I don't think Hellhole made it to the movie, but the house was like Hellhole.
At least the lavatory.
the leaning toilet of Alamo. But anyway, we rehearsed there so much, and I have some just very valued cassette tapes of those rehearsals. And so, the arrangements were honed. I will say we went through what we used to call the permutations or the permies, and we would A-B compare stuff. Do you like this? Do you like this? And we would just play and play and play. And I think that is why the songs end up sounding very precise and stuff, because we didn't leave anything to chance. It really was a fun song to play and also a challenging song to play.
It's the Hot Rock Podcast. My guest, the sensation of the 80s that are now a sensation all over again from San Francisco, the Lloyds, and their new album is their old album. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, well, then you'll have to go to the Hot Rock Podcast website and listen to this whole damn thing. It takes too long to explain. My guests here today are original Lloyds members, drummer Alan Thiele, guitarist David Martin. This title track, Attitude Check. I mean, if there's one thing people remember from the 80s, aside from the hair and the fun, is attitude. It was all about your tude. So where and what is the reference Attitude Check about? And what's the story behind this one?
I think that's a Ronnie J expression, right?
Oh, absolutely. We had a lot of Lloydisms. We'd have a laundry list of different things that we said. And even Lloyd's wasn't meant, like a jerk or a dope or something like that. So we were, calling ourselves sort of that. But Attitude Check, go ahead, Alan.
Well, I just remember that as a term. He also had one that was pretty cool called Charisma Bypass, but that never got turned into a song. Maybe he's not the originator of those expressions, and yet he did to us make them famous. And I remember it being sort of a tougher side of Lulu. And I also always thought to myself, gosh, this is really kind of disco. But the middle section was real disco. But it's cool because it kind of lives as a museum within a song, It's sort of the directly previous era to what we were doing, but it was in there.
I mean, the one thing that we did, again, as we talked about before, is that we would just throw in stuff that were influences to us. And again, but at the same time, we didn't want it to be in any way representative or as gamey, if you will, as the bands that were, making music in the 70s. And now, you've got yacht rock has all come back in the world.
Herpes is back too, but that doesn't mean you should like it.
Well, we're not all nostalgic about it. But, Dave and Steve, speaking of yacht rock, one of the coolest things about the song Attitude Check is that my cousin, he's so great, and they live up in Washington State, and he's always been really into the great outdoors, and they live on a lake, and he's always been into boating. And right from the beginning of when the Lloyds were together, he bought his first boat, and he named it Attitude Check. And I just saw him pretty recently, and I said, so, and the boat's still called Attitude Check. And I said, is this Attitude Check 2 or 3? He goes, oh, no, I think this is Attitude Check 5 or 6.
Oh, wow. The one thing I wanted to share is that, again, Ronnie J, he's Ronnie J. Perello, but Ronnie J wrote the song. He was a great writer, wrote very economically. From the beginning, this song was a hit locally. If you met somebody who knew you in the band and they didn't know you, they'd come up and go, Attitude Check, push the button, reject. And to this day, 43 years later, still, if you say you were in the Lloyds, pop, Attitude Check. At one point, there was a major Russian-United States situation brewing.
It's when Russia invaded Afghanistan.
And so we just basically didn't want to see war in the world, World War III and all that. So we literally rented a flatbed truck and a generator, and we played Attitude Check in front of the Russian consulate and in front of the government building down near City Hall in San Francisco. And just sort of to make the statement is that, come on, Attitude Check, push the button, reject.
The button, reject. You're way out of line, and here's a piece of my mind. You can't go around like you're a king, with his loyal subjects at his command. And you can't go around like everything was made for you on your demand. Attitude check. Push the button, reject. You're way out of line, and here's another piece of my mind. You wanna treat me like I Attitude check. Push a button, reject. You're way out of line. And here's a piece of my mind. Attitude check. Push a button, reject. Attitude check. Push a button, reject. Attitude check. Push a button, reject. Attitude check. Push a button, reject.
It's the Hot Rock Podcast. Steve Garland here with Alan Thiele and David Martin from the Lloyds. We are playing tracks from their finally released album of their 80s classics. The band is the Lloyds. If you like new wave, you got to go online and look up the Lloyds Attitude Check. It is finally out for digital download or off of CD. Now, where were these recorded, guys? This is the inside question for musicians listening. What studios around the San Francisco Bay Area did you do these at?
What's amazing is that they were recorded from 79 probably to 83, would you say, Alan?
Yeah.
And Coast Recorders, the record plant in Sausalito, Fantasy Studios in Berkeley, Rhythmic River in San Francisco, another independent studio called Oasis. And then on Attitude Check, the new CD, there are 7 bonus tracks, and those were all recorded live at the Old Waldorf. And actually, on the first 13, we do have to add that one other source was the Catalyst in Santa Cruz.
Why do you two think the band didn't get the breaks that lesser bands ended up getting? And is that why the band eventually broke up?
To your last question, yes. I think the lack of a recording contract and any sustained success, or at least the success we were looking for, did not happen. So I would say that was the main contributing factor to us breaking up. It should be said, we actually were offered a record deal as part of this whole process.
Actually, many.
Yeah, well, we were offered more than one, yeah, and a couple of companies, one of which was Warner Brothers for the soundtrack for this movie. Now, I don't think a soundtrack record ever came out for this movie, but we were offered a position on that. Every band that doesn't end up making it really big has a million stories about all the reasons why. But for us, it was they wanted, basically 50% of the ownership of the song, and that's why. And our manager said no in John Peters' office and was promptly told to leave.
Wow.
Maybe we can laugh now, but it was really kind of heavy at the time, which, ultimately led to us parting ways with him because, yeah, it's true. We shouldn't have given away half of a song that had a lot of excitement about it. But on the other hand, we kept 100% of nothing, and that's the old adage. We kept ownership of something that really was worth nothing at that moment. All we got from that session was a cassette.
Alan said it well. Because we really put our heart and soul into this project. Ronnie and Lulu were married, and they lost their marriage during this time between 78 and 84 when we finally dissolved. Some of that was documented on a really wonderful film piece that a guy named Jim Morris did. The one thing I will say is that when you're in the middle of something like this, you don't really know why things happen. And it often felt like there was a carrot dangled and then it get pulled away. But the thing that has happened, and that is the incredible grace and that we are grateful for now, is that Alan put together a website during the pandemic.
I had a bunch of people I used to work with. I would mention all the people we used to open for, and they'd go, I can't find anything about the Lloyds online at all. Who were you guys? Like, if you're not online, you have you don't exist. So I'm kind of glad that we've proven to those people I used to work with, yeah, we existed.
And if you want to learn more about the band, you can go to the shrine called thelloydsband.com, and that's spelled with 2 L's. The other great thing is that finally today, people can hear all this great music, and it's been remastered so beautifully. After this next song, we're going to talk about how it got remastered, David. So I want you to stick around for that. Before we go, though, I want to thank both of you, Alan, David, for coming on to tell the story of the Lloyds and to share this music. Let's finish up by telling everybody the record label that put it out and where they can find it. And then I want you to tell me about Rouge and Lipstick.
This is on Liberation Hall, and it started out as a project that Terry Hammer was doing with all of the tracks from the Old Waldorf that he had recorded. And David Martin had the really great idea of saying, well, let's add the tracks we put out on vinyl earlier. So the first 13 tracks are from the vinyl LP, and the last live track are from the Old Waldorf.
We put out really sort of a collector's item. We have a vinyl version of the first 13 tracks, and that's on Projectile Platters, I believe. And now we have a 20-song CD, which is, the 13 songs from Let's Go Lloyds, and then added 7 really fun live performances from the Old Waldorf. And you've got 20 tracks, and that's all on Attitude Check, the Lloyds, and that is available on Liberation Hall. And then you can also stream it on the Big Four: Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and Pandora.
Let's finish up with this song called Rouge and Lipstick. What's going on in this song, guys?
Thank you for picking that song.
You're welcome.
It's one that I wrote, and we were going basically with just sort of, again, real simple imagery, and Lulu added some lyrics to it. The song was just influenced from everything from a guy named Robert Johnson. We'd seen him open at a show for the Knack and the Police in Berkeley. But between Johnson and maybe Buddy Holly and, again, the music of the time, that sort of drove the feeling of the song. And Lulu delivered it. Again, we found this track on that weird 8-track used tape that was recorded at the Catalyst. And the rest, it sounds like this.
The Lloyds, live from the album Attitude Check on the Hot Rock Podcast. Thanks, guys, both of you, for joining the show. On the other side, David, I want you to stick around while we talk to the engineer who did the magic on this album.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Steve.
Tonight,
It's the Hot Rock Podcast. Steve Garland here with my guest from the Lloyds. Mick Conley, the engineer and master mixer, is with us, from Marty Stewart, his fabulous Superlatives, and so many other great country albums, Kathy Mattea, and so much more. And now you get involved in working on remixing and remastering the Lloyds, this impressive, high energy, but certainly not country, new wave act. And it's all from tapes back in the 80s that you've got to master up and make sound brand new. How did you get involved in the project?
Well, I've met Dave at a Marty show years ago, and he was interested in seeing the Marty's 54 Telecaster, which belonged to Clarence White, which we called Clarence. And I showed it to him after a show, and we just connected on a lot of guitar stuff, obviously, and we just had a lot of things in common musically. Then we had the time off, unfortunately, or fortunately, how you look at it, for this project during COVID, and, it came to be. He sent me an example, and I loved it, loved the energy, and just everything that I like in a band. I could just feel the energy of that band and how really good it was. It had a punk edge, but was a bit more sophisticated, and I really liked that.
What do you think were the biggest challenges in taking these tape recordings made 4 decades ago and getting them to sonically shine like you do on this release?
Well, one in particular was in mono off of a cassette, and that's why. Sonically, that was difficult, but there was something still magic about it.
And what did you do specifically to clean that up?
There's a lot of processing mid-side stuff where you process the middle and the sides separately with EQ and compression. Not quite available on mono track. So everybody's talking about AI these days, and there's a little bit of trickery I used for that. There's a program called Spectra Layers, and also some isotope products that can help to rebalance a few things, and just judicious use of EQ and compression to bring certain things forward in the mixes sometimes. That one was tough, but like I say, there was such an energy to that.
Let's talk about the live tracks for a second. What stands out to you, Mick, as the challenges that you faced with these live tracks? And I understand some came from an old 8-track reel-to-reel. Is that correct?
The live things have stuff you would redo, but it's live. And so there's an energy there that's lost in a studio usually. Now the Lloyds were great in the studio, as evidenced by the record, but live was a whole nother set of technical issues with noise and the room sounds and tape degradation over the years. A lot of that doesn't matter in a huge way if it makes you emotionally feel something. I may not get everything technically correct, either live or maybe studio work, but hopefully it makes you feel something. It goes somewhere dynamically, and that's kind of what I'm just really trying to bring out of the tracks, is just to enhance the emotion that it was played and sang with.
Yeah, Mick did unbelievable work on those tracks. They had an amazing energy. For him to be able to capture was stunning what he did.
There is that undeniable feeling that these songs, or at least some of them, should have been big hits. Did that cross your mind too?
Absolutely. I felt like I was transported back and would have been listening to the radio that was appropriate for this time. Just amazed that it never got signed.
It should have been, along with Blondie and the Motels and, some of the Missing Persons, some of those other acts from the 80s.
Exactly. And these songs, to me, could stand up against any of those artists that you named, and could have been on the radio. I could have listened to one of the Lloyds tunes after in Missing Persons or any of those people.
So, in essence, why did you feel, after listening to these tracks, that it was important overall to restore the music of the Lloyds and get it released worldwide after all these years?
I think this album deserved to be heard. To me, it was a shame that it never got the recognition that it should have had. And I felt that I wanted to be some small part of that, and help make that happen.
Mick and I worked on this thing for 6 months, doing files back and forth during the pandemic. A lot of times when people work together, their friendship goes south. We were very fortunate. Our friendship grew. Certainly my appreciation of his talent and his passion and his commitment. And we both shared the same obsessiveness, if you will. It was a wonderful process to work with Mick, and I'm forever grateful that he has the bad taste to get involved with this project.
I read recently that McCartney is going to use AI to separate out John Lennon's voice off of a cassette demo song. That blows my mind. So my question to you is, have you played with any AI tools that you think could change the face of how songs are restored?
Well, and that's a big buzzword now, even though we've had that for several years now. Melodyne is a tuning program that most people just started tuning instruments with. You could do polyphonic tuning. The Spectre Layers 10 is out now. I can pull vocals, bass guitar, piano, drums out separately. So that's probably what they're using. The Isotope plugins, which is a version of the Spectre Layers. You could take that cassette tape and pull John's voice completely out of it and isolate it.
Wow.
But the thing that's really important is there is a difference between if you were to go there using artificial intelligence to create or recreate a voice as opposed to extracting a voice. There is a big, big difference.
Absolutely.
And the thing that I had read and heard about with the Beatle thing is that they basically said, yeah, they were using, this technology, but they were not in any way, shape, or form having an artificial John, that it was definitely his voice. But to get it isolated and out, that's a word that we use, which is extraction.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is amazing to me. As a musician myself that writes original songs, I always hand things off to people like you, because my skill set is being able to write the song and put the instruments together. And after that, the industry needs and loves people like you, Mick, that can take that recorded music and find where it lands in the mix and how it ultimately shines. That is like a superpower to me.
The thing that I wanted to also throw down is that it's just like in baseball. That's my analogy. You still have a bat and a ball. You basically have the tools of the trade, but not everybody's going to be able to, quote unquote, hit it out of the park. And in the case of Mick Connelly, he is not only always looking to improve his skills and to get the most out of the music, whether it's in the studio or live, but because of his musical background and his talent and his commitment to excellence, it's going to be more musical. And he's going to use those tools to really do some magic. And that's not going to happen in the hands of somebody else. And again, I'm so grateful that we had the opportunity to work with him on this project.
The album is called Attitude Check, the band, the Lloyds. And if you haven't heard of them, that's okay, because you will. And when you listen to these tracks, you'll know that Mick Connelly gave a lot of his time and heart and fantastic superpowers to engineer these 80s tracks and make them sound fresh, new, and show off the energy that's inside them. So New Wave fans, you are going to love this. It is available wherever you buy your digital or CD music, including Amazon. And you can also get more information on the Lloyds off their website at thelloydsband.com. Hey, thanks guys, both of you, for joining the show today. I hope if you enjoyed the Lloyds album and the story behind the band that you go pick up a copy of it, because it will be well worth it. Thank you both.
Thank you, Steve. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Steve.
And that's a wrap for this edition of the Hot Rock Podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. This was our trip back to the 80s to rediscover the music of the Lloyds out of San Francisco. And now you can too, and check out their newly remastered album. I really dug it, and I think you will too. It's called Attitude Check. It's available wherever you like to get your digital music. You can also go to Amazon, pick it up off CD, or go to the Lloyds, what I like to call the classic website, that gives you all the information, press clippings, and history on the band themselves. It's called The Lloyds Band with 2 L's, thelloydsband.com. I'm Steve Garland. If you want to hear any of this, you missed any part of this broadcast, you can go to our website and listen to the entire podcast from the Lloyds or others in our collection, absolutely free, on demand, anytime. Just go to hotrockpodcast.com. hotrockpodcast.com. That's hotrockpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, you know the deal. Keep rocking.